Hi, this is Seth with Paper Pot Co., and I'm going to be talking about growing herb crops in the Paper Pot Transplanter. I've had some experience growing these in the US and in Canada, some of the farms that I've worked at, some of the farms that I've started. So hopefully there's some good information in here for you. Herb crops are a really profitable crop to grow for a good addition to your farm. We're going to be talking about basil, cilantro, and dill. So basil is grown in a 6-inch paper chain pot. And for the quick click drop seeder, it's recommended 3 millimeter thick top plate and a 4 millimeter diameter hole. You're targeting 1 seed per cell, and 3 rows per 100 foot by 30-inch bed is recommended. And that will take 3 trays. And 3 trays of 6-inch paper chain pots will cost you $10.80 in materials. 25 days in the nursery is recommended for basil. And then after you transplant it, 45 more days until you're ready to start harvesting. And if you can get 400 bunches, which is about what you can expect from a 100-foot bed, and $3 per bunch, that's $1,200 of profit per bed, which is fantastic. Some highlights for basil. A recommended cultivar would be Genovese or Everleaf. Both do really well. Don't plant early unless you have a heated greenhouse. Basil is a Mediterranean heat-loving plant, so they will not do well if it gets too cold. Basil also does not like to get too wet. It's really prone to getting black spots on the leaves and mold or mildew issues, so it's best to be irrigated with drip. And then also you want to only harvest when it's dry. And for continual harvest, just cut from the top third of the plant. That'll be the more tender, fresh growth that you're getting from the top of the plant. Bunches go in an open bag so that moisture doesn't condensate, which will cause it to expire a lot sooner than it should. So if you are going in bags, keep those open. And then get it to the cold room fast. Once it wilts, it's really hard to recover. So try and get off the field and into the cold room as quickly as you can when you're harvesting basil. You can expect up to 5 harvests from one plant, which is wonderful. And then after about 2 months, it is recommended to go ahead and pull it, flip the bed, and replant if you're going to do that at that time of your season. Trimming the flowers is important to keep the plant from wanting to reproduce and go to seed and keeping those nice leaves continually growing. So you can trim those flowers while you're harvesting, or you can actually take a hedge trimmer and just trim the tops of the plants as they need it. And then brown paper bags actually work great for bulk orders to restaurant. There is basil going in, 3 rows per bed, doing a nice tandem approach to the Paper Pot Transplanter. And there's that same planting, matured and ready for harvest. Beautiful crop of basil. Okay, moving on to cilantro. Cilantro is recommended in a 2-inch paper chain pot. Your quick click drop seeder top plate is going to need a 3 millimeter thick plate with a 7 millimeter diameter hole. And this accommodates clusters of 2 to 3 seeds of cilantro per hole. It's suggested 3 rows per 100-foot bed, and that will take you 6 trays of the 2-inch paper chain pots, which will cost you $13.94 in materials. Cilantro is 30 days in the nursery, and then 30 more days until you're ready for harvest, pending your local conditions. And if you plan for 600 bunches off a 100-foot bed, and you're getting $3 per bunch, that's up to $1,800 per bed for cilantro. Really profitable crop. A recommended cultivar is Santo. This is bolt resistant, which is great. Cilantro is prone to bolting, so getting a variety that has less of an issue with that is really helpful. So with 2 to 3 seeds per cell, this guarantees that at least one will germinate. And even if that's all you get, that'll be just fine. So they're ready for transplant when they are 2 inches high and with true leaves. Then you know they're needing to go into the ground. They need a really fertile soil, so they will bolt if there's not enough nutrients in the soil. They also need to be irrigated well and ensure that the paper chains are adequately buried. If they're not, they're really prone to drying out. So you need to take that extra step and just check after getting them in the ground that all those paper chains are adequately buried. You can cultivate with a wire weeder, which really works well for getting close to the plants without damaging the plants. And you can plan for 2 harvests per planting, and even up to 3 if you can get away without the plants wanting to bolt and go to flower. It's good to hydro-cool these immediately after harvest. Cilantro does tolerate being slightly wet for transport, so you don't have to stress about getting these super dry. And if you pile them nice and high at the market, that can help keep the moisture in and keep them from drying out and wilting on you. So here's a quote from Red Fern Farm about cilantro and the Paper Pot Transplanter. He said, "One investment that has really paid off, seeding into the paper chains allows us to germinate seeds effectively, even in cold temperatures, and grow them for a few weeks in the propagation greenhouse before transplanting out or in the high tunnel. If we tried to transplant something like cilantro at this density using traditional plug flats, the transplant time would be unsustainable. This cilantro is probably 4 weeks ahead of where it would have been if we had direct seeded it. That means the total time for the crop in the field or tunnel is greatly reduced. It means more turnover in our beds and ultimately more food per acre going to our community members." Red Fern Farm. Dill is recommended in 2-inch paper chain pots, and no drop seeder is needed for dill. It's such a tiny seed that it works best to hand broadcast 2 tablespoons evenly over the surface of your whole tray. 5 rows per 100-foot bed is recommended, and that will take 10 trays, a lot of trays when you're doing the 2-inch paper chain pots. So that's going to cost you $23.23 in material for your paper chains. And dill is recommended 30 days in the nursery, and then only 15 more days if conditions are right until you're ready to start harvesting. You can plan for about 600 bunches of dill from a 100-foot bed, and at $3 a bunch, that's also $1,800 a bed. Dill and cilantro, if you can get them dialed in, hugely profitable herb crops. Recommended cultivar for dill is Hera or green. Dill does have inconsistent germination, so sowing densely is better than not. So that's why just sprinkling it over the entire surface of your prepped tray of paper chains is recommended. And you also don't want to let the transplants get bigger than about 1 1/4 inches. They're not going to do too well if you let them get bigger than that for transplanting. They are slow growing when they're young, so you have to keep up on cultivation and make sure that weeds are not going to outcompete the small dill plants as they're trying to get established. And anything you can do to get a stale bed before planting and ensure a weed-free bed for them is going to be really helpful, especially with dill. Dill should be dry when harvesting, just like the basil, and avoid washing if you can. And this is only going to have 1 harvest per planting, as opposed to the cilantro and basil. Here's a quote from Little Sun Farm. "Cilantro and dill, these crops are usually direct seeded, but in the 4+ weeks it would take before the plants are this big, the weeds would be large and plentiful. I've mown down too many direct seeded beds because of the weed pressure. Maybe one day I'll be skilled at direct seeding, but until then I'll keep using the paper pot." And I have found this to be true myself as well. Direct seeding is really tricky and just a gamble with these crops. So doing the paper chains, I think, is a real game changer for these. So there you have it, herb crops. Hopefully there were some good takeaways for you in this presentation. We talked about basil, cilantro, and dill. If you haven't already grown these, or if you've only had experience direct sowing them, hopefully this will encourage you to give it a shot with the Paper Pot Transplanter.